June 8, 1998. It was just another quiet night inside Aso Rock Villa. At least, that was how it looked from the outside. Behind those heavily guarded walls, something extraordinary was unfolding. Nigeria's most powerful man was dying, and for several minutes, nobody around him seemed willing to say it out loud. Just hours earlier, General Sani Abacha had absolute control over a nation of more than 100 million people. His words could imprison a journalist. His signature could silence a newspaper. His orders could change the future of an entire country overnight. Even people who had never met him knew one thing: you don't just cross the path of Sani Abacha. By sunrise, he will be gone. No farewell speech, no final broadcast, just silence. And almost immediately, the rumors began. Was it really a heart attack? Or was there something far more mysterious behind the sudden death of one of Africa's most feared military rulers? Then came another question, one that still follows his name nearly 3 decades later. Where did the billions go? Because while Nigeria struggled through economic hardship, investigators would later uncover one of the biggest state looting scandals in modern African history. Billions of dollars gone, hidden across banks and shell companies around the world. But before any of that, before the money, before the fear, before he became the face of military dictatorship, Sani Abacha was simply a quiet soldier that very few people paid attention to. And strangely enough, that may be his greatest weapon. This is a story of a man who rarely raised his voice, yet controlled an entire nation through fear. A man who survived one military government after another until he himself finally became the government. And near the end of this story, we will come to one of the most controversial nights in Nigeria history. A night filled with conflicting accounts, unanswered questions, and rumors that refuse to disappear even today. But to understand how it all ended, we have to understand how it all began. Sani Abacha was born in Kano in 1943. Unlike many military leaders who love public attention, Abacha preferred staying in the background. He wasn't known for speeches. He wasn't the most charismatic officer, and he certainly wasn't the kind of man who walked into a room demanding everyone's attention. If anything, people often remember how little he spoke. Some former colleagues describe him as calm, reserved, and even difficult to read. But beneath that quiet personality was someone who understood power remarkably well. Because while others competed to be noticed, Abacha was studying the people around him. He was watching, waiting, learning, and above all, making sure he was always standing close to the people who mattered most. As a young officer, he built a reputation for discipline and loyalty. Those qualities earned him promotions, but promotions alone don't explain his rise. His real talent was political survival. Over the next 2 decades, Nigeria experienced one military takeover over another. Government rose, government fell, friendship disappeared overnight, yet somehow Sani Abacha always remained standing. He became associated with several military takeovers that reshaped Nigeria history, from the political upheavals of the 1960s to the coups of 1975, 1983, and 1985. His name kept appearing alongside those who emerged victorious. Now, historians sometimes disagree about the exact nature of his role in each of these events. What they all agree is based on something else. Abacha had an extraordinary ability to position himself close to the center of power, regardless of who eventually came out on top. That wasn't something many officers managed to do. Now think about that for a second. Military coups are among the most dangerous political events ever imaginable. People lost their careers, people lost freedom, and sometimes they lost their life. Yet somehow, one man kept surviving them all, again and again and again. At some point, you have to ask yourself, was it luck? Or was Abacha simply better than everyone else at reading which way power was moving? By the time General Ibrahim Babangida became Nigeria military ruler in 1985, Abacha had become one of the country's most trusted senior officers. He served in key military positions, eventually becoming Chief of Army Staff and later Minister of Defense. The higher he climbed, the quieter he seemed to become. He rarely sought headlines. He didn't spend much time defending himself in public. Instead, he let other people speak, and while they were talking, he was quietly building influence behind the scene. It was a strategy that worked remarkably well for him, because history often remembers the man standing at the front of the stage, but sometimes the man standing just behind him is already planning the next act. For nearly 30 years, Abacha had stayed close to power without becoming its main target. He had watched presidents rise, he had watched leaders fall, he had seen alliances form and broken. Now, for the very first time, the highest office in Nigeria was within his reach. All he needed was the right opportunity, and in 1993, Nigeria will eventually hand him this opportunity, not intentionally, but through an election that millions of Nigerians believe represented their greatest hope for democracy, before that hope was suddenly taken away. And when the country was thrown into uncertainty, this quiet soldier who had spent decades waiting in the shadows finally stepped forward. June 12, 1993. For many Nigerians, it didn't feel like just another election. It felt like a new beginning. From the north to the south, from Christians to Muslims, people came out in numbers rarely seen before. They waited patiently under the sun. Some traveled long distance just to cast a single vote. For once, many believed their vote will eventually count. And at the center of it all was one man. Moshood Kwamshin Mawu Oluwale Abiola, better known as MKO Abiola, a wealthy businessman, a philanthropist, a familiar face across Nigeria, and more importantly, he had managed to attract support across ethnic and religious lines in a way few politicians ever had in the history of Nigeria. As votes were counted, one thing became increasingly clear: Abiola was on course to win. Not just narrowly, but convincingly. For millions of Nigerians, democracy had finally arrived, or so they thought. But before the final result could be officially completed, everything changed. General Ibrahim Babangida's military government cancelled the election. The decision took the country by surprise, and to this day, the annulment remains one of the most controversial movements in Nigeria's political history. Different explanations were offered at the time. None convinced the majority of Nigerians. The reaction was immediate. Protests spread across the country. Businesses shut down and workers went on strike. The country's economy slowed under the weight of uncertainty. Hope quickly gave way to frustration. Now, imagine waiting your entire life to freely choose your leader, only to be told after you have already voted that your vote no longer counts. That was how millions of Nigeria felt. It wasn't just an election that had been cancelled. For many people, their faith in democracy had been cancelled too. And under growing pressure from both within Nigeria and the international community, Babangida had to step aside. But he didn't just hand over power to the man many believe had won the election. Instead, he created an interim national government. Its leader was Ernest Shonekan, a respected businessman with years of corporate existence. On paper, the arrangement looked like a temporary solution, but in reality, almost nobody expected it to last. And among those who certainly didn't want this power to last was the quiet soldier serving as Minister of Defense, Sani Abacha. For less than 3 months, Shonekan tried to steady a nation already drifting into crisis, but he faced an impossible task. He lacked the political legitimacy. The military still held enormous influence, and the country's most powerful soldiers were watching every move he made, especially one of them. Then, on November 17, 1993, without tanks rolling through every street, without widespread gunfire, without the chaos many people associated with military coups, everything changed again. General Sani Abacha announced that the interim national government had been dissolved, and he assumed power as head of state. The transition happened so quickly that many Nigerians barely had time to process what was happening. The quiet man who had spent decades standing beside powerful leaders had finally become the most powerful man in the country. And unlike those before him, he showed very little interest in sharing that power. Because what followed over the next 5 years will become one of the darkest chapters in Nigeria's modern history. The signs appeared almost immediately. Newspapers, a critical part of the government, were shut down. Printing presses were closed and journalists were arrested. Although some newspapers continued operating in secret, changing offices almost every night to avoid security agents, while others simply disappeared. And for ordinary Nigerians, speaking openly about politics became increasingly dangerous. Fear settled quickly into everyday life, not because soldiers stood on every street corner, but because nobody knew who might be listening. Political opponents were detained without trials. Some were released months later, while others spent years behind bars. A few never returned alive. One of the most surprising arrests involved a man who had once ruled Nigeria himself, the former military head of state, Olusegun Obasanjo. The government accused him of participating in an alleged coup plot. He denied the accusations. A military tribunal convicted him and he was imprisoned. Many international observers questioned the fairness of this tribunal. Years later, after Abacha's death, Obasanjo will regain his freedom and eventually return, this time as Nigeria's democratically elected president. History can sometimes take unexpected turns, but at the time, very few people could have imagined that outcome. Then there was a man at the heart of the June 12th struggle, MKO Abiola. The election may have been annulled, but he never stopped insisting that the mandate belonged to the Nigerian people, and he wasn't prepared to walk away from it. In 1994, Abiola publicly declared himself the rightful president of Nigeria, and soon afterward, he was arrested on charges of treason. From that moment, he would spend years in detention. Government change, pressure from the international community increased. Human rights organizations continuously called for his release, so did foreign government. Yet the answer remained the same: no. Several reports suggest that Abiola was offered opportunities to regain his freedom if he agreed to renounce his claim to the presidency, but he simply refused. Whether one agreed with his politics or not, few doubted his determination and outside the prison walls, millions of Nigerians continue hoping that one day he will walk free. While attention remained fixed on Lagos and Abuja, another struggle was unfolding hundreds of kilometers away in the Niger Delta. The Ogoni people had spent years complaining about environmental damage linked to oil production. Their most recognizable voice was a writer and environmental activist, Kensaro Wiwa. He wasn't asking for the overthrow of the government. He was demanding environmental justice, accountability, and a fairer share of the wealth generated from Ogoni land. His campaign attracted global attention. It also attracted the attention of Abacha's government. Kensaro Wiwa and 8 other Ogoni activists were arrested. They were tried before a special military tribunal. The proceedings were heavily criticized by international human rights organizations, which argued that the trial fell far short of international standards of fairness. The tribunal sentenced all 9 men to death. Around the world, leaders appealed for mercy. Human rights groups pleaded for clemency. Even countries that rarely criticize Nigeria publicly begged the president. But on November 10th, 1995, the executions went ahead. The international reaction was swift. Nigeria was suspended from the Commonwealth. Sanctions followed. Abacha's government became increasingly isolated from much of the world. Yet inside Nigeria, his grip on power remained firm. If anything, it became even tighter, because while the world focused on human rights, another story was unfolding quietly behind closed doors. One involving secret withdrawals, foreign bank accounts, and trusted allies, and billions of dollars that investigators would spend decades trying to trace. And by the time anyone realized how much money had disappeared, it was already too late. As General Sani Abacha tightened his grip on Nigeria, one man remained at the center of the country's unfinished story: MKO Abiola. To millions of Nigerians, he wasn't simply a political prisoner. He was the president they believed they had chosen. Yet day after day, month after month, year after year, he remained behind bars. Outside the prison walls, the country struggled to move on. Some Nigerians continued to campaign for his release. Others had grown exhausted after years of protest, strike, and political uncertainty. But one question never really went away. If Abiola won the election, why was he still in prison? Governments from around the world asked the same question. Human rights organizations called for his release. Religious leaders appealed for mercy. Yet Abacha's government remained unmoved. Reports from that period indicate that Abiola was offered opportunities to regain his freedom if he agreed to renounce his claim to the presidency. He refused, and whether you agreed with his politics or not, it is difficult not to admire that level of conviction. He believed the mandate belonged to the Nigerian people, and he was determined not to bargain it away. Now here's the heartbreaking part. By 1998, Abiola had spent almost 4 years in detention. He had missed birthdays, family moments, the ordinary freedom most people rarely stop to appreciate. Yet, he still held on to hope. He had no way of knowing that history was about to take another dramatic turn. Because Abiola's fate, before it would be decided, the man who had kept him in prison would suddenly be gone. On June 8, 1998, General Sani Abacha died unexpectedly. Nigeria was torn. Just weeks later, under a new military government led by General Abdulsalami Abubakar, discussions about Abiola's release gathered pace. There was hope everywhere. and for the first time in years, freedom seemed close. Then, on July 7th, 1998, during a meeting with a Nigeria delegation and visiting American officials, Abiola suddenly became ill and collapsed. Despite efforts to save him, he died that same day. An autopsy was carried out with international participation, concluded that he died of natural cause consistent with heart disease. Even so, the timing of his death, coming only weeks after Abacha's own, left many Nigerians deeply suspicious. To this day, questions and speculations remain part of public discussions, even though no conclusive evidence has emerged to support claims of foul play. Two men whose lives had become linked by Nigeria's political crisis, dead within weeks of each other. It was a moment that changed the course of the nation's history. But while Nigerians mourned the death of MKO Abiola, another discovery was quietly beginning to unfold. Investigators were about to uncover something that would shock the whole world. Not hidden weapons, not secret prisons, but money. More money than most people could even imagine. Trusted associates, family members, shell companies, and foreign bank accounts. There was various methods used for these particular transactions. In some cases, government contracts were allegedly inflated far beyond their real value, and in others, funds were withdrawn from the Central Bank of Nigeria under the justification of national security before being redirected somewhere. Investigators in several countries later traced large sums to accounts across Europe and beyond. Recovering these assets would take years, and in many cases, it still continues today. Now, just think about what that kind of money would have meant for the Nigerian people. Hospitals, schools, roads, electricity, job creation. Entire generations might have benefited from those resources, but instead, much of it allegedly disappeared into private accounts. It is one of the reasons the phrase Abacha's loot has become part of Nigeria's political vocabulary. Not because it was a catchy name, but because the scale was almost impossible to ignore. Members of Abacha's family and several close associates were accused of helping to move or manage parts of this fortune. Some denied, while others faced investigations in Nigeria and abroad. And over the years, courts in different countries froze assets linked to the case. Switzerland eventually returned hundreds of millions of dollars to Nigeria. Other countries followed with additional recoveries. Altogether, more than $1 billion have been returned over the years. Yet, investigators believe that not every asset has been found. Some accounts may never be identified, and some companies may never be connected, and some of the money could remain hidden indefinitely. It is a reminder that financial crimes on this scale don't simply disappear when a leader dies. Their consequences can last for a generation. Ironically, just as investigators will later begin uncovering the full extent of the alleged looting, the man at the center of it will never answer a single question, because on one quiet night inside Aso Rock Villa, his story came to an abrupt end. Officially, it was a heart attack, and unofficially, that is where one of Nigeria's greatest political mysteries begins. June 8, 1998, it began like any other night inside Aso Rock Villa. The guards were at their posts. Officials moved through the corridors. Outside the villa, Abuja slept peacefully, unaware that history was about to change before sunrise. Then, everything happened at once. General Sani Abacha, the most powerful man in Nigeria, suddenly fell gravely ill. Within a short time, he was dead. He was just 54 years old. The official announcement was brief. General Sani Abacha had died suddenly after suffering what the government described as a heart attack. It was simple direct, and the case was closed, or so it seemed, because almost immediately rumors began spreading across Nigeria. Some claimed he had been poisoned, others insisted he had died under embarrassing circumstances involving foreign visitors who had allegedly been brought into the villa that night. Over the years, countless versions of the story have circulated. Some have become deeply rooted in popular culture. Others have been repeated so often that many people now mistake them for established facts. But the truth is, none of those claims has ever been conclusively proven. No publicly available evidence has confirmed the more sensational stories surrounding his death, and members of Abacha's family have consistently rejected many of those allegations. That's one of the biggest challenges when telling stories like this. History gives us facts, rumors fill in the gaps, and sometimes those rumors feel convincing enough. Sometimes they refuse to die, but unless evidence supports them, they remain exactly what they are, all rumors. What we do know is what happened next, and those events are beyond dispute. Following Islamic tradition, Abacha was buried less than 24 hours after his death. His body was flown to Kano. Thousands gathered as he was laid to rest. For some Nigerians, it was the end of a dictatorship. For others, it was the loss of a leader they believe had brought stability during a turbulent period. His legacy had already become deeply divided, and it still is. Meanwhile, inside Aso Rock, power changed hands with remarkable speed. General Abdul Salami Abubakar was sworn in as Nigeria's new head of state, and unlike his predecessor, Abubakar immediately signaled a new and a different direction. Political prisoners began to regain their freedom. Restrictions on political activity were removed, and for the first time in years, Nigeria could once again see a path back to the civilian rule. It was the beginning of a new chapter, but one enormous question still remained: what had happened to the nation's money? Abacha's death didn't end the investigation, and if anything, it finally allowed it to begin fully. As officials searched government records, interviewed witnesses, and worked with international investigators, a more bigger picture slowly emerged. Money had allegedly moved through shell companies, trusted associates, foreign bank accounts, and secret financial network stretching far beyond Nigeria's borders. Recovering it will become one of the largest asset recovery efforts in Africa's history. Working alongside authorities in Switzerland, the United Kingdom, the United States, and several other countries, successive Nigerian governments pursued assets linked to the Abacha's family and their associates. Year after year, court cases continued, negotiations dragged on, and millions were recovered, then hundreds of millions more. By the 2020s, more than $1 billion had been returned to Nigeria through various international agreements. Some of those recovered funds were earmarked for infrastructure and social investment projects. Yet, investigators have long believed that not every dollar has been found. Some assets remain tied up in legal disputes. Others may never be traced at all. The full story may never be known. Now think about that for a moment. More than 25 years after Abacha's death, government are still searching for money allegedly taken during his tenure. That is to tell you how enormous the operation is believed to have been. Very few political legacies survive for decades, but this particular one has lasted more than a decade. Not because of species, not because of monuments, but because investigators are still following the trail. History rarely gives us simple heroes or simple villains. General Sani Abacha remains one of the most controversial figures Nigeria has ever produced. Supporters argued that he had restored order, strengthened parts of the economy, and maintained national stability during difficult times. Critics Remember a government marked by political repression, detention without trial, international isolation, and allegations of corruption on an extraordinary scale. Both perspectives continue to shape conversations about his legacy, but perhaps the most important lesson isn't about one man, it is about power itself. Power without accountability, power exercised behind closed doors, power that can decide elections, silence critics, control institutions, and influence the lives of millions. The story of Sani Abacha isn't just the story of a military ruler, it is the story of a nation searching for democracy, searching for justice, and for answers that in some cases may never fully come. Because somewhere, perhaps in forgotten files, perhaps behind anonymous companies, perhaps inside bank accounts no investigators had yet uncovered, part of this story may still be waiting to be discovered. And if you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like and subscribe, because African history is filled with stories that deserve to be told, not as rumors, but as carefully researched journey into the people and events that shape the continent we all know today as Africa. And until I see you in my next video, I really love you. Thank you.